For question number 31, I have to get rid of this word cosecant x, and remember that cosecant is across from the word sine, so I'm going to rewrite this as 2 sine x plus the reciprocal of cosecant is sine, so I can write that as 1 over the sine of x equaling 0. From here I have a couple options. I'm going to go with the getting an LCD. So if I have one denominator, I want a denominator underneath all of them. So I'm going to put a 1 under here and over there. And so now the least common denominator is going to be sine x. And if you remember from our Algebra 2, if I multiply this entire problem by sine x, it'll clear the denominator. So now I'm going to take the whole thing times the common denominator. So multiplying all this by sine x. Sine x times 2 sine x will give me 2 sine squared x. The sine x times 1 over sine x will be just plus 1. And the sine x times the 0 will be 0. This reminds me a little bit more of the beginning of the worksheet where I just need to get this sine squared x by itself. So I'm going to have actually 2 sine squared x equals, move my 1 over to the other side, equaling -1, divide by 2, and we'll have sine squared x equals -1/2. Now I need to get rid of the square, so I take the square root, giving me sine x equals plus or minus, and then I'd have to go out. I have imaginary numbers, and since they're imaginary numbers, I have no solution because there are no imaginary numbers on our unit circle. For our last problem, we have another case where we have a trinomial, and it's nice that the trig words are all sine in this case. So I need to factor parenthesis parenthesis for my trinomial. To multiply to get a 2 sine squared x, I would need a 2 sine x times a sine x. My back term is positive, so it's going to be a plus plus or minus minus. And since the middle term is positive, we'll need a plus plus. How do you multiply to get a 1? That's going to be 1 times 1. From here, we will do our zero products. So the first one's going to be 2 sine x equals -1. Dividing by our 2, we get sine x equals -1/2. And our second one will be just sine x equals -1. So now we need to go up and look up sine being -1/2 and sine being -1. So the sine value is -1/2 at 7 pi over 6 and at 11 pi over 6. And then our final answer is going to be when is the sine x -1, and the sine x equals -1 only at one value at 3 pi over 2. So now we'll just go down and write our final solutions. For sine x equaling -1/2, our values were 7 pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6. And our sine x equaled -1 at the value of 3 pi over 2.